Hello and welcome to another episode of On The Topic. This week I'm grabbing my crusty old wired controller. I'm Alex.
And I'm pulling out the Spectrum, putting the cassette tape in and waiting 30 minutes for it to load. I am Dan.
And this week we've got another Vault episode, Dan, haven't we? We're going all the way back to... What date was it? Do we know?
We are
2018?
going all the way back to... Here we go. 21st of October 2018.
There you go.
It's an oldie, but it's a good one.
It's a simpler time. We haven't been doing it long, only, 5 months or so?
Yeah. We had a bit of a short break. Well, technically speaking, we're on a short break now.
Technically speaking.
Technically.
Yeah. But it's a really good episode, and I think a lot of people kind of wanted this. I seem to remember we had some polls out on social media. And it's back on the weekly roundup days, and that week we were doing retro gaming, and it's something I don't really have an awful lot of time for. It's that old age kind of thing, isn't it, Dan? Like you have a little bit more money these days, not much, but have a little bit more money to be able to buy these things, but no time.
No.
Whereas when you're younger, you got all the time in the world, but no money.
Yeah.
It's interesting. I wonder where the crossover was, where you had the money and the time. I don't know if I ever had that.
I think I would have been late teens.
Right.
Probably.
It's like the people say, like you wouldn't realise it, but there was a last day that you went playing with your friends in the woods, or did this activity, or the last time you'd ever do A, B, and C. There was a time where we had that freedom, and we didn't really appreciate it until it was too late.
To be young again.
I know, but we're not lamenting what we haven't got now. We'll talk about what we did have and what we sometimes get to do now, but actually it's more retro gaming, and I think retro gaming's had more of a resurgence in the last couple of years, Dan. There's lots of remasters, especially interesting, I think, since COVID. There's been lots of remasters. Perhaps people haven't been able to afford to bring in voice actors or do new IP. They bring back some of the old stuff.
Yeah.
Need for Speed, Final Fantasy.
Yes.
Look at PlayStation. They're doing all of their original, Naughty Dog and Insomniac back catalogue and remastering them for modern. The Spider-Mans, The Last of Us's, the Uncharted's. They're not new. They've been out for 10 years plus. But yet they're going back to the old ones because the old games are great.
Does nostalgia hit the same though? I mean, I picked up Tony Hawk's 1 and 2.
Seems like a trick question.
Must have been back in 2021. Because it was sort of like just coming up to... I don't know, we were sort of just coming out of COVID periods, but I need something to play, and didn't quite hit the same
I know what you mean.
levels of enjoyment that I got when I was playing it when I was 15 years old.
Yeah.
Music was great, don't get me wrong, that took me back to a simpler time. But the game itself, just, it's not aged well.
No. And I've had similar, when I've played like on Xbox, they've got the Rare catalogue, and you've got all of the old games on there.
They are good.
And they are good. But you don't half feel the age, and they are a little bit slow, a little bit cumbersome. You do enjoy it. So Perfect Dark is a great example, where it's a great storyline, but it's a bit slow. Like
Banjo-Kazooie as well.
100%.
That was really hard to play when I picked it up again on the Rare replay.
Right, because we're used to, I guess, quicker, more responsive inputs. There's no lag, there's no delay, and the delay, if there is one, is going to be with the graphics. Well, you don't have that today. And so your interaction is very, very different now than it was then. And of course then you've got the popular culture stuff, the music you say, Dan, what you're watching on TV, what's going on in the world, your social life, all those things kind of make that experience.
Yeah, for sure. And
now we're paying taxes, and some of us got kids, or we've got jobs, and we've got this and chores, and it's not the same.
No.
But in this episode we talk about all the great stuff. So the Amstrad, the tapes.
The hand-me-downs.
I mean, that's how I got into it.
Same.
I talk about, I believe, the Master System, Sega Master System, and then talking about the GameCube, the N64, the Sega Saturn. These are things that people actually pay lots of money for, ironically now. All those things, from where we're recording, Dan, they're upstairs in a box.
Oh.
You can't have them. But hopefully they're in roughly working order. But these things are worth keeping hold of. But we talk about all these things, our favourite games on them, and some of the stories that you just mentioned, Dan, some of the nostalgia. It's all in this episode, and I had a lot of fun doing this. We did a volume 2, didn't we?
I think we did sort of, didn't we?
Yeah.
Wasn't
it's a spiritual successor.
Yeah. I think it was more like current gaming.
Yeah. But this one is really good. So if some of the things we reeled off you don't recognise it, even this episode's going to be for you because you'll be like, oh, what's an Amstrad? What's a Dreamcast? What's a Sega Saturn? Makes me feel really old.
What is a Spectrum?
Yeah.
Dan, why were you playing Rainbow Island?
Exactly.
It was a good game. Fight me.
Yeah. Well, no.
Not literally. Don't fight me. I'll probably lose.
Possibly. But yeah, it's a really good episode. We hope you enjoy it. It's a very special Vault episode. Shall we throw us into it?
Let's do it. Hello Radsters and welcome to another episode of the Weekly Roundup with Alex and Dan. As ever, I am Dan.
And I'm still Alex.
He's still Alex.
I am.
So today we're going to be talking about something that's particularly big, or was part of our generation, especially growing up, which is gaming.
Yep, still important to us now, actually.
Yeah, I mean, I still game on my mobile phone, and this is how big gaming is now. You can do it on various levels of mobile phones, consoles. It's good fun.
It's big business, but I guess to kind of understand where we've come from, we're going to be indulging you, listener, in a little bit of nostalgia, go down memory lane, and perhaps educating the millennials of the audience, because there'll be some concepts of game playing that perhaps people aren't quite aware of. So I guess with that in mind, Dan, where did you start off with? Because I think we've shared very similar kind of gaming paths, but when did you kick off your first gaming experience?
Mine was around 1992, and I can remember one of my parents' friends passing down a ZX Spectrum. Now, for any of our younger listeners that are listening and tuning in, to describe what the Spectrum looked like, it was a keyboard with a onboard cassette player. I remember this thing taking ages to load. It was like a cassette tape. You put it in, you'd wait 10 minutes just for the thing to load, but it was great. I mean, I was able to play games like Paperboy and Rainbow Island.
Well, it's strange and interesting that you say that, because I got a hand-me-down from my cousins. So they were at this point then on a SNES, I think it was, and I was given the Amstrad, CPC, again tape-fed. And what you used to have to do, and this is now quite unheard of these days, even loading screens now, they're non-existent in modern games to some extent. They load in the background. What you do is, as Dan, you said, you load the tape in, and then you have to go away, and you come back half an hour later. But from the Amstrad, I'm not sure if it's like the same for your Spectrum, but the game may not load.
Yeah, no, I had that same problem.
So you'd be waiting half an hour, listener, and you may come back and there may be an error. Or the game might be at the start screen.
Or you'd have a black screen.
You may never actually come to the point where you could play those games, and that was just the way it was back in 91, 92, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was. And then I had a bit of a game changer. A bit later on that year for Christmas, I was given
You were a lucky boy
system.
from the sounds of it.
I was given a Master System.
Yeah.
It had Sonic the Hedgehog built in on boards, and I loved Sonic especially, sort of growing up. And then a few years later on, just after my brother was born, I was given a Mega Drive, and again playing the Sonic games, Sonic 2, Sonic 3, Sonic and Knuckles.
So just out of interest, Dan, were you given the Mega Drive because it was a condolence, because you had a little brother now to steal your presents? Was that perhaps?
Yeah, I reckon it was probably that.
Yeah,
right, here you go. We're not going to give you that much attention now. We
still care about you, but there's now another person in the family that we need to give attention to.
Yeah.
So here's this computer game to keep you quiet.
But I mean, interestingly, again, like as we sort of get further into this episode, my brother sort of became a part of my gaming growing up, and I say we'll get into that a bit later on. And the three games that I'll be mentioning a bit later on will be the games that also changed his gaming life.
Right.
And he ended up playing. So it's a great way to sort of bond, essentially.
And he was your player 2 to your player 1.
Well, he spent more time watching me play them. And that's just the way it sort of was, really.
The early day Twitch, I guess. Real IRL Twitch.
Yeah.
Wasn't it? Streaming games these days is big business, but you didn't have that back back in the 90s. You had someone come around your house to watch you play a game, and then you used to hand over the controller. So that was Yeah, that was quite an interesting time. I mean, for me, very, very similar. And you will hear that over the last episodes, actually. We are learning more about ourselves as individuals as you are, listener. And I had a Sega Master System.
Yeah.
But it was second-hand. So I got it for, I think it was about £60 at the time, which is roughly about 120 in our money these days. So it wasn't loads of money, but it wasn't cheap as a 7-year-old.
I mean, even the games were quite expensive, if I remember rightly, growing up.
They were
about 25 quid.
Yeah.
And again, sort of coming to the modern days, that probably equates to double that price.
Most definitely. So I think that's at least one thing which we have in common with modern gamers is the price is still extortionate. But anyway, I had a Master System, and then what I will then talk about is the Game Boy, the original Game Boy, the grey one.
I think we've all had one of those. I had the yellow brick, essentially.
Right. Okay. Yeah. So I had the Game Boy, which I loved, and then I went on to the Sega Saturn.
Yep.
Which was Sega's last real ditch at trying to keep within the console market.
It sort of had a bit of a blip, didn't it, the Saturn, if I remember rightly? Because did the Dreamcast come after that?
I think Dreamcast was either slightly before or just after. I don't think they timed their releases very well, and you're either one or the other. So you had people still stuck to the console, but actually competing within that kind of market, which was quite strange.
Yeah.
A concept. And then I went on to Nintendo 64. Well, I'll stop waxing lyrical on my past, but I first started off with a tape-fed gaming, and I think the one game which really stuck out for me, or the one I could actually end up playing and loading when it decided to load, it was called Harrier Attack. Now, this was a very simple game. There was three real colours to be going on with. Green was the ground.
Yeah.
Blue was the sky. And then a couple of dots, the pixels, were the planes or the boats.
Yeah.
Very, very simple controllers, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. Up and down, after you take off from your aircraft carrier. Up and down, and left and right is your speed. And your space bar was either your bombs or was your missiles. And that was it.
Wow.
This was literally 8-bit gaming at its best.
This was the 80s, 90s equivalent of Call of Duty then?
Probably, most definitely. And there's no save function, so every single time you load up that tape, you are expected to replay that game over and over again. I
mean, until cartridges were introduced, we never really had the save function. I mean, some cartridge games back then you could save your game. I mean, I especially remember that in Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles.
Yes, you could save the stages, couldn't you? Not necessarily in-game, but the beginning of that level you could, I think.
And again, sort of going back to the N64, although they had memory cards, they still seemed quite redundant because, again, that cartridge had that save function, especially in GoldenEye.
Yes, which we'll come on to a little bit later on. I guess that features on both our lists, right?
Mine isn't. I purposely left it off because I thought you might want to talk about it, yeah.
Fair enough. But yeah, that was, I think, my first real entry into the gaming world on my tape-fed machine. But what was yours, Dan, in back in the day in your old tape-fed? What was your favourite?
Oh, I loved Rainbow Island.
Yeah.
Essentially, it was a very colourful game back then, from what I can remember, and you're shooting rainbows at your villains to destroy them, and you'd had to use them to sort of make platforms as well, which was quite cool.
Oh, okay, so it's a side-scroller.
Yeah.
Okay.
I just remember one of the bosses, I think it was the first boss, is this massive spider, and you had like 6 or 8 platforms on either side, and you had to sort of jump around trying to kill it with your rainbows.
Sounds magical.
Yeah, and then there was Paperboy, where you literally you're going up a road, it's either left or right, and you use a button just to throw your papers at. And you get your points from smashing windows and plant pots.
Not for successfully landing a paper on someone's doorstep. It was actually destructive. Okay, sounds like my type of game.
But yeah, that was my childhood up until, again, the Master System and Sonic the Hedgehog.
So was Sonic, I guess, your defining game on that console?
Yeah, I mean, I ended up loving Sonic for years, and say when I got to Sonic 3 and Sonic and Knuckles, where you could interlink the cartridges and make the game bigger, that was probably the game changer for me. And then a little bit later on, I ended up getting a SNES.
Oh, right, yeah.
I started playing Mario 2, Mario 3, and then this one will feature on my list shortly, which is Super Mario World. But back then, it was a bit like Marvel vs DC, or even Nintendo, Sega, Sonic, or Mario. I loved both.
You weren't, choosy.
No, not at all. I'm not a fussy person.
Fair play. Well, I mean, they're all fantastic characters and franchises. I mean, for me, the Sega Master System, I had Sonic. I had all the ones you usually expect, but the one that really stood out for me when I first started to research this podcast was Lemmings.
I remember Lemmings.
There we go. See, there's a smile on your face, Dan.
Yeah.
So, for those who don't know much about Lemmings, we'll talk about the fictional blue-haired, green-haired, identically dressed little minions, and they'd be walking around the screen. And the idea is you'd have to get from one part of the map to the other.
I remember this. I really struggled with this game.
It was the first one where you got to use your grey matter to try and understand how you can get as many of your little people from one side of the map to the other without meeting their demise. So certain lemmings would be able to stop others from walking past. They'd be called the blockers, I think, or the holders. There'd be ones which could dig, so dig holes.
Yep.
So if you're on a different level and you've got to dig through, the earth or platform, they could do that. There's some which could create and build like bridges. So if there was massive gaps, get a couple of them to start building bridges to help the rest of their colleagues.
Do I recall one having an umbrella where you could float down?
Could float down.
Yeah, I remember this.
But you could only use them a certain amount of times.
Yeah.
So if you had quite a large gap and you hadn't built perhaps a bridge going downwards, and you only had, say, four umbrellas, you could only get 4 lemmings safely home because the other ones were splat.
Yeah.
So it really was your strategy thinking game. And you spend hours again just going through those levels. The good thing is though, they gave you a special code, so there's no save function. But after you complete each of the levels, you're given the code so that you don't have to replay it over and over again. And I absolutely adored that game. But if you Google it now on YouTube, we'll give you some links to some reputable channels. It's it's very low res, and perhaps I had have rose tinted glass when I think back on it now. But it was a really, really good game, and it challenged you, something different to the other ones I played previously.
So I'm now going to talk about Super Mario World. So this was probably one of the biggest game changers for me playing games, and this was the first game I can remember playing where it was like bigger and brighter than some of the games I played before. Like I'm sort of talking bigger than Sonic the Hedgehog.
No, it can't be bigger than Sonic.
Yeah, I mean this had so many worlds and so many different levels. It just oozed charm, and it was creative, and it was challenging. Like it was something that put my little brain as a 9-year-old to the test, and I just loved it as an introduction as well for Yoshi. So this was the first time we'd ever seen our favourite little dinosaur. And I can just remember like there was new mechanics as well, so you could get Mario to jump and spin where he would like break through ground and blocks, which was cool. And there were new power-ups like capes. So if you ever played played Super Mario 3, he was the raccoon where he could fly.
So you'd headbutt a block, and then that block would then
churn out like a feather or a flower. The flower, we know that you can throw your fireballs, but the feather
of course it does. You pick up a flower and you can then spit fireballs at people.
Yeah,
that's lots cool.
It was probably the first time I can remember there being like a map as well on a game, not your open world like we know now, like Skyrim and such. But it had 7 worlds, and you had to battle Bowser's minions essentially on each different castle to get to him to save Princess Toadstool. Now I can remember this game having several secret exits. So I think there was 96 in total.
Oh wow!
And if listeners, you have played this game, please correct me if I'm wrong. But you'd find like just a random keyhole just in the sky or something, and you'd have to find the key to get out of it.
Okay.
And it would take you a different path on the map.
So it gives you further replayability, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, I never got all 96 exits, all the secret routes, but I know looking and researching this, there have been a few, and it's the thing to do apparently. But you'd spend forever trying to do it.
Huh. And that's on the SNES, do you say?
Yeah, it was on the SNES, and I think you can still get it now, like on the Switch and all the other platforms.
Yeah. I mean, for me, sticking around the same kind of time frame as I mentioned before, I had my first handheld console, the Game Boy. It was a brick. If you hit someone with that, and I think I did drop it on my sister's head a couple of times before, it'll do serious damage.
Is that sibling abuse?
On the record, no. But off the record, it might have been used in anger. But either way, when it wasn't being used in anger, it was a gaming device, and again, cartridge fed.
Yeah.
So you load the cartridges in the back. They were grey. They come in quite lovely plastic boxes adorned with the artwork. So they were, I think, a little bit cheaper than usual Master System-esque games, but nonetheless, it was big money, and yeah, you used to put in your AAA batteries, probably about 6 of them. You may get 2.5 hours worth of gaming, but they were a joy. And the one game that really sticks out for me is a game called James Pond.
I remember this. Wasn't he like a frog or something?
I think he was a cod or a fish.
That was it.
So it was a side scroller, first of all, and it's only really in 2-tone colour. So Game Boy, the original at least, was non-colour. Of course, it was Game Boy Color.
Like a black on the back of the screen,
greeny, black, grey with shades of grey to depict certain backgrounds. And the Game Boy, actually, a little bit of fact here, it sold at the time over 118 million units worldwide.
That's impressive. So I remember having the yellow one, and one of the games I remember playing on that was Pokemon.
Yep.
I'd say we've had a few good reactions to what our listeners have been playing in the past, and there's a hilarious one from our friend Joey at Casey Design, and we'll get to that once we finish doing our games.
Okay, well, I'm looking forward to hearing what our listeners have to say, but I mean, for me, James Pond was amazing. I mean, again, no save function, so if you've run out of lives, that's it, ladies and gentlemen, you have to start again, which can be quite infuriating. The whole idea is that it was based on James Bond, of course, James Pond, and the supervillain named Dr. Maybe, of course, supposed to be Dr. No.
Dr. No.
Who apparently has overtaken a ruthless mega corporation, Acme Oil Company, and was filling the oceans with radiation toxic waste.
Always sounds dodgy.
Which is always bad for ocean-dwelling animals. And of course, James Pond was tasked with taking him down. And that's basically the premise. So you go through stages, as you do expect, with an end boss, and you go through different types of levels, almost like your Sonic Fair. And I think that was my first introduction to sore thumbs. So you're tapping away so furiously at that end boss level that you end up getting little blisters on the inside of your thumbs. But that game is fantastic, and again, I researched this for this episode, and someone's actually done a playthrough. I think it's an hour or an hour and 10 minute, full run through of the game. I'll link it in there just so you can kind of envisage about just how limited our childhood gaming experience was. But yeah, I have fond memories of that game just because I spent hours upon hours trying to beat it, and it's a very simple concept of a game.
Yeah. So the next one up for me, I was actually introduced this before I had a PlayStation from one of my best friends, and it was sort of late 1997, and I think, if I remember rightly, it was Boxing Day. He invited me over to his house, like, I've got this game, and I know you're not a massive fan of this franchise yourself, but it was Final Fantasy VII.
Okay.
I fell in love with this game because the cinematics were incredible. Like, I remember just sitting there for a couple of days watching him play this game. I was like, I love this. Like,
for the PlayStation?
This was for the PlayStation, PlayStation 1. Mm-hmm. And I didn't get a PlayStation 1 until like a few months after being introduced to this game, but this was one of the first games I bought for very obvious reasons, for loving it.
Yeah.
And this is the first time I can remember it being an open map on a game, but you sort of start the game off in a city called Midgar, which is like just this sort of floating, I don't want to say a floating city, but it's like on like a pedestal as such. You got like the slums underneath, and
right.
It's a strange game, and it doesn't necessarily take itself too seriously. It takes you on a wild adventure, so you can go from things like snowboarding to learning choreography for a marching military band.
How niche.
Very niche. And one of the funny points that sort of stands out for me is meeting seedy men in a brothel. So,
which you'd later do in your adult life.
Not me as such. Imagine me on Guildhall Square in female clothes, which is essentially what you do with your main character, Cloud.
Oh, right.
But you do meet him. He's the first guy. He's your main character.
Yeah.
And he's always the one you sort of guide around. And he's jumping off this train, and he embarks through the city, Midgar, with some fugitives blowing up reactors to stop it from polluting the Earth, or the world you're all set in. It was also one of the first games that challenges loss. So one of your key party is killed off, and for me it was heartbreaking.
Oh, right.
Like, I felt challenged mentally at the tender age of 13. Like, hang on, what?
Because that doesn't really happen. In games up to that point. If they die, they come back. You press the use life button, or you restart the console, and they're back again.
It's still quite unheard of now. It's not common to happen, especially in role-playing games like this.
No, I mean, the only ones that really come to mind is Mass Effect, where you can choose a couple of times, the fates of the non-playable characters. But yeah, you're right. It's not really a concept that's utilised often.
No.
So, especially back in the days, was that late 90s?
Yes, this is 97.
Yeah.
And it's still a much-loved game now, as I'll sort of get into shortly. But you're not sort of just blowing things up, essentially. Like the story becomes a lot vaster before you leave Midgard into your wide world, and you end up chasing the main villain Sephiroth and his weird alien mother Genova around the world, and they're trying to summon this meteor to destroy this world you're in. As far as sequels go, they did make a film out of it.
Yeah, I understand it wasn't particularly well received.
No, it's just one of those things that isn't necessarily needed. But sort of heading now into 2019, 2020, they are anticipating a remake of this game.
Okay.
Because it's so well loved. Now, something that hasn't been well received is the whole game isn't going to be on one disc. They're going to break it up.
Right.
Which I don't know how I feel about this. I'm just going to stick to the original, I think. I love that game.
So the future remains uncertain for Final Fantasy, but nonetheless the older games are loved by people across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And I say the franchise, for me, there were certain games I didn't love, but Final Fantasy X as well was particularly a standout one for me for these guys.
Okay. Well, I mean, keeping with that time frame, then, so for me, we already touched on this. Proud owner of a Nintendo 64. Had to be GoldenEye.
Yeah.
Now,
absolutely.
GoldenEye, for me, you can't beat it. It is the quintessential first-person shooter. And I think the awards actually speak for themselves. I mean, they've got BAFTA here, the BAFTAs. They've got Console Games of the Year, Best Developer Awards. It's quite the celebrated game of its time. And when people say, I'm going to get my mates around to have an old school evening, the next words that come out of their mouth is, and we're going to play the N64 and it's going to be GoldenEye, because it's the first real game where you have 4-player split screen.
Yeah.
There's no online multiplayer, ladies and gentlemen. This is before that time, just before. So you have to get your mates round, and you can see what they're doing when they're walking around the screen. So if you know your maps well enough, you can head them off, or perhaps get the drop on your mates. But it was modelled almost perfectly on the film. So they had photorealistic facing of the characters and the actors who played those individuals in the film. And for me, has got to be still the go-to game if you want a first-person shooter. Look no further than 1997. It's got to be developed by Rare.
Yeah.
The best game. I mean, it at the time it sold 2.1 million copies.
I remember selling my PlayStation just to get an N64 to play this game.
And that in itself just speaks volumes in terms of just how sought after it was, and it's still loved to this day. I
remember as well, you had to complete the game on all the different difficulties to open up 2 secret levels.
Yep.
That was a toughie.
And then they had to do some of the side objectives, which were quite tough anyway, to then unlock certain guns.
Yeah.
and then certain characters.
Certain cheats as well. I remember that.
Yeah, which was the paintball mode. Which
Paintball
was quite
mode.
good.
You could get like double guns. The tough one was invincibility, and I think you had to complete facility in like 1 minute something.
So having a speed playthrough.
Yeah, and like facility, ladies and gentlemen, wasn't the easiest level either. Like it was huge, if I remember rightly.
It was big. Lots of Russian soldiers running around with AK-47s, poaching corners and
trying to get decoders off of Dr. Doak, who literally was like on the face of every soldier as well.
Yeah, and then he'd run away from you, and you got to karate chop him in the back of the neck. So if you kill him, then it's game over. As you can tell, we're still scarred by that level. But all joking aside, it's got to be one of my most favourite multiplayer games. But first-person shooters.
Didn't you ever hate the person that was Objob as well? Like in the multiplayer,
Whoever
he was so small and like
Yeah.
you could never shoot him. You had to like throw a timed landmine at him or something and try and blow him up.
Hope for the best. But yes, an absolute quality of a gem.
Again, sort of sticking to the N64. Now, this is one of my brother's suggestions as well, and this is Legend of Zelda: Ocarina of Time.
Yeah, so I was going to mention that, but I thought I'd go for James Bond first of all, GoldenEye, because I thought you might bring this up.
Yeah, so again, this was a game changer for the Zelda franchise, and this is the first ever 3D Zelda game, which I didn't know until writing the notes for this. Now, I can remember this game being the one where you jump backwards and forward in time to try and save Princess Zelda from the hands of Ganondorf.
Mm-hmm.
Now, what made the game great was that you had 2 different Links and 2 different Hyrules. So, for example, we had both the young and older Link played similarly, although each one you could have access to distinct items.
Like swords or shields and things like
Yeah,
that.
precisely, because I think if I remember rightly, when you're young Link, when you have the big shield, you can only crouch with it on your back.
Yep, because it's too heavy to walk around with.
And then when you're an adult, you can just hold it in
Yep.
front of you, which was great. And I think, again, the young Link had the catapult, and the older Link, you had a crossbow.
Yep.
Which was really cool. And then, as young Link, Hyrule was peaceful, whereas older Link, this Hyrule was just in tatters.
Yeah.
And you've got zombies all roaming the map, and Hyrule Castle has been replaced by Ganondorf Citadel, and the world is awash with fear. Again, what made this game so good was that it was aided by brilliant narrative with an unescapable sense of dread.
It was, because the time's ticking, I think, towards the end of the game, where you don't have your own pace. You've got to pick things up a gear, because time is running out for reality, I seem to remember. And I think for me, the game, it had all those complex mechanisms for that time of gaming. But then also, if you throw in there, the whole kind of button mashing ocarina song kind of challenge, where you've got to try and remember what the buttons are to play the music, which either does one thing or does the other, and it spun its own kind of life. He's trying to remember how to play a particular song on this this wood instrument. It's absolutely insane as a concept.
I need to remember a song to try and teleport me to a certain temple. It was just off the charts. It also gave the impression that Link was part of something bigger than just himself. Like, you get a lot of hero games like this where it's just about the hero.
Yeah.
But this was a lot bigger, and I think it added a lot of gravity to his journey, and it emphasises his status as a hero even further. Consequently, he becomes a symbol for everything that he's fighting for, and it is literally a proper good story of good versus evil.
Yep. A lot of hard work's been put into it, because as I said, Dan, you've got these side quests. You can, ride your horse across Hyrule, which
Epona,
to participate in races, or you can go and fish. So take time out and just sit by a lake and fish.
I remember those days.
You could spend hours just literally just doing absolutely nothing that progressed the storyline, just mucking around, and a lot of time and effort went into making that game because it was expansive.
Yeah, I mean, it's got a lovable supporting cast as well, and you've got Link, who puts his faith into strangers that help him along the way in his quest. And it was multicultural as well. Like, this is the first game I can remember where you had different creatures along the way. The Kokiri, which is what essentially Link was in the forest. You had the Gorons, the rock-eating monsters in the mountains. You had the fish creatures called the Zoras, and then you had the Shikas and the Gerudos, I want to call them.
Good pronunciation there.
In the deserts,
Yep.
which was really cool. And I just think it revolutionised the way that 3D action adventures were thought about, especially the combat system. Like, I can remember you had to lock onto an enemy and you'd be able to sort of circle it and like hack at it with your sword.
Yeah.
Also, again, going back to the soundtrack. Just fantastic.
Second to none.
Second to none. You can find this on YouTube, and it was notably paid homage to by ZREO, Zelda Reorchestrated. So check it out. It's wonderful.
We'll pop a link in the description below.
Yes. But that's it for my games.
And that's it for mine. But you, the listener, we put out a couple of posts on all platforms, didn't we?
Yeah.
We've got a couple of emails to read out as well. But do you want to have a pick of a couple of comments, Dan?
I'm going to go through Facebook first. So our friend Joey at Casey Design.
Hello, Joey.
He once beat the Elite Four on Pokemon with a level 100 Diglett. Just saying. Again, my brother...
Is that good?
I'd say that's impressive, especially for a little ground Pokemon, which was quite pathetic.
Well done, Joey.
Impressive.
Yep.
Impressive feat. My brother, again, sort of chimed in, and he was just being nostalgic about watching me play the 3 games that I've just talked about.
Yeah.
And GoldenEye. Again,
of course.
This is one of the games he picked up, and he now is a PC gamer, which is apparently the console to have.
Oh, right.
I don't know. I mean, I don't know about my consoles anymore. We got Chris Evans.
Not the Chris Evans.
Not the Chris Evans.
But a Chris Evans.
The Chris Evans.
Oh, Evans.
Evans,
oh, right.
yeah.
Not the ginger guy with the glasses.
No, sadly not.
Okay.
But I think Chris is more of a legend than him anyway.
Yeah, he'll do.
So he talks about Super Mario 64, which I loved as a game.
Uh-huh.
This was so good. And he also enjoyed playing Metal Gear Solid 2 on the PS2, which was quite fun, but he said it was a damn thing hard to finish. We've got one of my former colleagues, Jareth.
All right. Shout out to Jareth.
Playing Donkey Kong Country 1 and 2 on the SNES, and it had the best soundtrack that he can recall. And again, talking about what we got, Rock Band.
Right, yeah, so this is where you plug in the peripheral...
The guitar with 4 or 5 buttons, and you had to sort of play along to the tracks as the buttons came up on the screen, which was quite cool. Like, my brother had Rock Band, and I think I preferred playing the drums.
I had Guitar Hero, which I think they, again, you either one or the other, weren't you, in terms of the games. They're very, very similar. I forgot about that. Yeah, they're really good games.
And then we got the final one from Mr. Stilwell, who enjoyed playing the Italian Job on the original PlayStation. Banging around Italy in old Mini Coopers was just amazing. Never played this game, unfortunately, but I might try and give it a go at some point.
Yeah, try and download it. I'm sure someone will be able to help you out there.
But that's it for our Facebook listeners.
Well, for a couple of emails, so we've got Keir. Now, Keir's telling us that one of the earliest and fondest memories is of their mum helping them complete the water temple on Ocarina of Time to Zelda.
Oh, that was an absolute nightmare to play that temple. Nightmare.
So, it's bad times when you've got to get a parent to help you out. But apparently the favourite games growing up were the classic PES of 2006.
Yeah.
Which apparently is the best football game ever made, Keir says.
I would agree on that.
Okay, I don't think I've ever played it.
It was very enjoyable.
Again, you're either a PES or a FIFA fan.
It was at a point where FIFA had slumped and PES was just hit like it peaks.
You tend to find that's usually how it works between those two. And GoldenEye and 64. And they say just because it was the only game which had the console at the time and the game that they spent the most of their childhood playing Halo 2.
Also, we had a couple of responses on Twitter.
Oh, right, cool.
So we had a podcast get back to us called Fill Me Up.
Shout out to that podcast.
These guys loved playing The Simpsons Hit and Run on the PS2. It was challenging, it was fun, it was funny, but it wasn't too difficult, so it was just an enjoyable
Wasn't
game
that The
to play.
Simpsons take on Crazy Taxi?
Yes. Yeah, precisely.
So you have Simpsons characters in wacky vehicles, but you've got to take characters from one point to another, and they pay you.
Yeah.
And the more wackier the way to get there, the more money you get, I think is a principle.
Yeah, it was something like that.
Okay.
And we got a classic here. So shout out to John Smithstad. Please correct me if we're wrong. Myth Pac-Man. So Pac-Man,
yes.
Pac-Man was a classic where you go around the little tunnels. Pop, pop, pop,
Yeah, eating blobs and then ghosts and trying to not be eaten by those ghosts.
John is also part of the Quick Flick Critic blogspot, I believe. So shout out to him.
All right. Well, thanks for getting in touch, guys. I mean, I just got one more email to cover off. This is from Stephanie. So Stephanie, we've got, I think I corrected her earlier on via you, Dan. 9 paragraphs, is it?
Was it 9? She told me it was only going to be 7.
We've got quite a few paragraphs of text here in this email. Reading it out won't do it justice, but she's talking about Final Fantasy VIII.
Oh, okay.
It's her most favourite game of all time, even though she never actually finished it. Apparently there was a glitch on the second disc where the game would freeze, and she used to try 2 different discs and both had the same problem.
I had that problem.
Which, if you think these days, that's manufacturing fault, and you'd be going back and getting your money back. But in those days, I mean, I can't tell you how many discs I went through, even latter times of my my Xbox 360. I had to buy Gears of War 3 times because the Xbox kept on chipping away physically at the disc.
It was a nightmare.
These things still happen even to this date. But yeah, she says she tried a couple of years ago to start the game again on PlayStation 3 because it's for sale through the PlayStation Store.
Yep.
She decided that this time she would finish it. And apparently after starting playing, the PlayStation broke. It seems like there's a bit of a curse of Final Fantasy VIII for Stephanie. She had to go. It had to be sent away to be repaired, and everything on the hard drive was lost.
Oh, that's savage.
So she said that it took this last attempt as a sign that maybe she was not supposed to finish the game, and she made peace with it. Although she thinks she prefers not knowing how the game ends anyway. So that's an interesting insight there about the trials and tribulations of gaming. And perhaps Stephanie never will actually know how that game ends and will never experience the glory of Final Fantasy VIII.
I never did.
And its final end credit scene.
If it makes her feel better, I never found out either. Again, I had the same issue. Again, going back to the games, I can remember if you put a slight scratch on a PlayStation disc, that was it, you were
game
screwed.
Over.
Never going to load that again.
No. Never to be played once more. So that was our gaming nostalgia, our trip through memory lane. Thank you for everyone that wrote in. We had quite a few there. Please do continue to share your thoughts. Do you disagree with what we said? Is there anything to add? Do you share our thoughts? Have you had any other wacky left field kind of computer consoles that perhaps is even stranger than tape-fed
Amstrads and Spectrums,
8-bit gaming? Get in contact with us. We'll link all the details in the description below, but we've got emails, social media, you name it. Dan and I are monitoring, so please do get in contact with us. But thanks again for great insights and sharing your nostalgia, and for another week I've been Alex
and I've been Dan,
and we'll see you next week. Hello and welcome to another episode of On The Topic. This week I'm grabbing my cassette player and my old crusty wired controllers. I'm Alex.
Oh, grim. And I'm dragging out the Spectrum out of the vault, putting the cassette tape in and waiting 30 minutes for it to load. And this week...
Who are you?
Who am I?
We haven't introduced yourself.
Oh, for fuck's sake. Oh, God.